Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about these unwritten rules that you have to deal with at companies, and I'm going to start right away. It's very black and white, and the unwritten rules are mainly masculine rules. So I'm going to show you two videos where we can find out where the differences start, when we're young boys and young girls, but you will see them in a few minutes. But first I want to tell you a story of my own, how I discovered several unwritten rules. When I was working at what I call, when I was really working, I had a real job, that's what I call it. It was longer than 30 years ago. I was working at an electric supply company, and I was very ambitious. And I was working there for 3 years, and I wanted to get to the next position. I wanted a promotion. But they didn't have any jobs available. So I went to HR and I said, well, I'm ambitious. I would like to have a new position. I want to grow. And then he said, well, we don't have any positions available now. But what you can do is you can apply for another job outside the company. As soon as you have a job offer, come back. And I thought, well, that's weird. He told me to do that. And so I did. I applied for a new job outside the company, and I had a job offer. So with that job offer in my pocket, I went back to HR, and I said, well, I have a new job offer now. Then he said, well, give me a few days. And what he did in those few days, he talked to several managers, and he said, Monique is going to leave the company. And then suddenly things happened which were kind of strange. Managers came up to me and said, well, it's going to be a waste if you leave the company, so we will create a new job for you. I thought, whoa, okay. And then I was also very flattered because, you're asked to stay, and they were creating a new job, and I can fill it in on my own way. So they asked me if I wanted to do this, and I said, yes, of course I want to do that, which is kind of stupid. The moment that I should say yes right away, there's no place to negotiate anymore. But anyway, I told my husband that they offered me this new job, and then he said, well, there's one thing very important now. Even though that you said that you're very interested, they will ask you what the salary offer will be. And at that time, I had a salary of, I think, about $3,000 a month. And then the new offer was $3,200. So he told me, the moment they ask you what the salary offer is, you will tell them that the offer is $3,600, which would mean that I would have to lie. So I got very upset with my husband. I remember that we were driving a car, and I even said to him, stop the car, I'm going to walk home, because I was so upset. And he said, no, just say that, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I got home walking, and I had this conversation with this manager, which I liked very much because he offered me this job. So he asked me, so what's the salary offer in the new job? And then I know my face was turning red. I could feel that right away. And I said, well, $3,600. And I felt awful. And then he started laughing, and he said, well, we'll offer you $4,000. And I was like, what? And then I said, oh, okay, but I felt really, really bad. But he was just laughing because he knew that I was lying. Now, these unwritten rules underneath this for this specific company, was that you had to have a job offer outside before they would, give you a promotion. That was probably one of the unwritten rules specifically for this company. But the other one is that you have to brag. Bragging, lying, that's probably one of the unwritten rules. About bragging, I will get back to that in a few minutes. But, just bragging, it did give me a lot of money extra, didn't it? So it works. But before that, I'll go further. I want to show you. Yes, I want to show. Oops, it's already there. Oops. I need some help.
And it's talking that makes them best friends. A lot of what they do is telling each other secrets. Boys play in larger groups. It's the activity that's central. Their best friends are the ones they do everything with, not necessarily the one they tell everything to.
I wanted to say something before the video was shown, but what you see here is the different ways that boys and girls bond to each other, which is kind of the basic of these unwritten rules. In this very short video, and I hope you saw it, we saw 3 differences in the way boys and girls bond. The first one is that boys tend to play in groups. I know this is very black and white, but they tend to play in groups of more boys. And actually, that's the start of networking. Networking is a very important unwritten rule. In these groups, the boys know exactly the informal hierarchy. They know exactly who's the fastest, who's the smartest. They know whose mother has the best cookies they can eat. So they have this informal hierarchy. While girls tend to play in pairs, they have a best friend. Now, in these groups and in that informal hierarchy, they have respect for the hierarchy. Now, this is what happens. When I was a young kid in school, and you might have had the same example, when you were allowed in sports, you were allowed sometimes to choose your team. Have you ever had that? You could choose your team? Okay, well, the boys, as they were playing in groups, they know, or they knew, or they know, who were the best players. So if a boy was allowed to choose the team, they would choose the best players. Now, if his best friend was not a good player, he wouldn't be chosen. Is that right? Now, we have these girls. You're a girl. You were allowed to choose your team. You only have one best friend because you're only working in pairs, which is very black and white. And you choose, and your best friend, girl best friend, is not a good player. And you don't choose her. What happens? You don't have any best friend anymore, do you? So what the boys do is that they respect the best players, and for girls it's important to have a best friend. And in this, and that's when it happens, why it's so important that for boys, gaining respect is much more important than being nice to each other. So that's also a big difference. So gaining respect is also an unwritten rule. And for a female environment, it's much more important to be nice to each other. So that's a big difference. The second difference, what we saw in this very short video, is that boys tend to do things together instead of talking to each other. And in that doing, and this is the most important part of the unwritten rules, there's competition. And competition is a very important unwritten rule. It's all about winning and losing. Now, let's say that there are two boys, and they are playing soldier. Now, they're sitting on their horse, and let's call them John and Peter. And they're sitting on their horse, and they're having a sword. What happens is that John and Peter, they play with a sword, and John kicks Peter from his horse with the sword. What does Peter do? He gets back on his horse. He starts laughing, because that was round number one. So they're playing on the horse again with the swords, and John kicks Peter from his horse again. Peter gets back on his horse, and they're having lots of fun. It's all about rounds, round number one, round number two. It happens round number three. It's the same thing happens. Now we have John and Jennifer, and John kicks Jennifer from her horse. What does she do? She starts crying. She starts crying, goes to her mother, and says, I don't want to play with John anymore. And John is still sitting on his horse, waiting for Jennifer to come back, because the game started the moment that he kicked her from the horse. But for Jennifer, the game is over. And this is a very important unwritten rule, is that you always have to get back on your horse. Whether you're a man or a woman, you always have to get back on your horse. Now, let's say that you're negotiating. You're very well prepared, and the first thing that you have to be prepared of is the first no. Now, many people prepare the negotiation on the content. They will prepare about what they want, they will prepare about kind of arguments, but they're not always prepared on the first no. And the first no is like this. Let's say you want a salary increase. Now, few of you might want to have that. This is what happens. You may ask for, let's say, a 500 euro raise. And then if it's a male manager, there's a difference between male managers and female managers. If it's a male manager, he will probably say, no, that's not going to happen because we don't have any budget. That's the first no. Many women take the no very seriously, and they think, okay, this is a no, the negotiation stops. You get kicked off your horse. But if it's a male manager, this is the introduction to start the game. This is the moment to play the negotiation game. So the moment he says, no, we don't have any budget, you come with your first argument. And for instance, you say, well, looking at my last year's results, I think a salary rise of 800 euros, I don't know what I asked, is very correct at the moment. And then he will say no again. For instance, he will say, well, if I give you a salary rise, I have to give the whole department salary rises. And that's the invitation to come with argument number two. So it's all rounds. If you have a female manager, then it's differently. Because if she says no, it's a no. Yeah. And this is interesting when we're getting more female managers managing men as well. And this is very black and white. This is what happens. So he wants a salary rise, and he goes up to his female manager. And he says, I want a salary rise of 500 euros. Who cares? And then she says, no, we don't have budget. And then he says, OK, this is fun. We're going to start now. So he will say, OK, looking at my results of last year, I believe that a 500 euro rise is very correct at the moment. And then she will say no again. And then he will say, oh, she's good in negotiation. This is fun. So he comes back with his third argument, and then she says, what part of no don't you understand? So this is very interesting that the female unwritten rule, there's no is no. The male masculine, or the male unwritten rule means the no is where we're going to start. So realize that there's a difference between female unwritten rules and male unwritten rules. And this is very black and white, I realize that, but I really want to show you that because it's, you just have to know them. Because I always say, you have to know the rules, then you can choose to play by a few of these rules, then you can gain more influence, and then you can change some of these rules. Now, let's go to the next video, and it's about, we'll see 4 boys in a tunnel, and they are talking to each other about how high they can hit a ball.
Mine's all the way up to there.
Stand here.
Mine's up to the sky. Oh! Oh, man! Mine's all the way up to heaven. Mine's... Oh! Mine's up all the way up to God. Mine is good.
Okay, these boys are bragging, correct? Okay. Are they telling the truth? No. They're not telling the truth. Are they having fun? They're having lots of fun. And they know it's not true, so they know that they're lying, but they're having lots of fun. And this is the way little boys connect to each other. This is the way how they bond. Now let's get one boy out of the tunnel, and we put a young girl in it. What would she probably say? Huh, I hear somebody laughing here. What would she probably say? You're lying, or that's not possible because you don't know where God lives, or show me. You know, we have these women who say, show me. Well, that's not going to work. And the point is, when we show this to groups with only men, the first thing is that they say, we'll kick her out of the tunnel, and she's not allowed to play with us anymore. So you have to understand that the masculine rule is you have to brag, and it's a game. It doesn't have to be true. Actually, that is a very important unwritten rule. What you say doesn't have to be true, like what I did with my salary offer. It doesn't have to be true. Now, I know this is going to feel uncomfortable. And I always say, the moment it feels comfortable, you're not learning anything. So I trigger you just to feel much more uncomfortable, because that's the way to learn. So bragging is a point. So now let's say we'll put one girl in it, and she says you can't do it. At that moment, she stops the game. It's done. But at the moment that she plays the game, this is what happens. She might say, well, I kicked my ball that high, it never comes back. So she's in the game. And then these boys will say, oh, wow. But that's only round number 1. And then round number 2 comes. But as a girl, you've never learned that because you were sitting on the car tire just talking to your best friend. You have never played the game with competition about winning and losing, and that's, that's very important. So bragging is a very important unwritten rule, so I want you to challenge yourself to do it once in a while. And I always say, the moment you feel, and this is specifically for women now, and a few men, I think, the moment you feel as if you're bragging, you're probably telling the truth. Think about that part. And what I mean by that is, showing your results, telling your results, sharing your accomplishments. That feels as if you're bragging, but that's just the truth. Now let's look at some other unwritten rules. Well, this is the bragging one. Show your results. Now, why would this be so important, to show your results? Because many of you will probably think, it's just my work. I get paid for my work. Is that correct? That's what you do. But you have to realize that if you work for a manager, he manages or she manages more people. So if he or she has to find out what all your results were, that's a lot of work. So you have to tell him or her, and then you'll help him or her by sharing your results. Now, I have an example of a woman I coached, and this what happened. She won a very big client for the company, you know, and that was on a Tuesday. And somebody told her, you should tell your director about this, that you got this client into the company. And she said, well, this is just my work, and I will tell him Friday when I see him. This was on a Tuesday. Thursday night, her director met this client, and this client said, wow, we have a good deal with your company, and he had no clue. So that's also why it's so important to show and tell your results, and make it bigger. I mean, you can always brag a little bit on showing your results. It's a very important unwritten rule. Instead of thinking, it's just my work. Of course it's your work, but you also have to tell your results. Not only telling, but also put it on your CV, put it on LinkedIn. We see a lot of CVs where people write down what they've been doing, but they don't write down their results. Now, if you write down what you're doing, I always say, that's a nicely busy working CV. But it's not a result-driven CV. So you have to put that on as well. Now let's take a look at some other unwritten rules. Status. Status is a very important thing in the unwritten rules. Now I remember that one day I had a talk with a high police officer, and it was about an assignment to get a female interim manager into his company. And that was years ago. That was actually the week before the iPhone came to the Netherlands. And let's say that was on a Friday, and I was there on Tuesday. So I went into his room, and there was this very big table, and there was nothing on the table except for the iPhone. But the iPhone would be in the Netherlands on Friday, and this was Tuesday, so we had it before. So I thought, okay, this is a status thing. This is a status unwritten rule. I have to use that. And I was very well prepared, you know, and I had all the data about female interim managers and stuff like that. So I went into the room, grabbed the iPhone, and said, wow, you have an iPhone. And he said, yes, because I was in the United States. Oh, and what did you do there? And he went to this Congress, and he met all these important people from the FBI. And then I said, well, what can you do with an iPhone? I mean, at that time, you could still ask that. And then he would sit next to me, and he would show me everything about his iPhone. And we spoke, and I'm not lying, we spoke 45 minutes about this iPhone. 45 minutes on this iPhone. And of course I was about the content. I was very well prepared. And then he said in the last minute, you can do the assignment, that's fine. Just talking about status. So if you meet someone and status is important, use it. Even if status is important for your own role. Now, if you have a new position and you have to drive this big car, drive this big car. And not this very tiny shopping car. Because the big car is for your position. People look at you. And if you're driving this bigger car because it's for your role, they will see that that you're a manager or that you're a sales representative. It estimates your role. So you have to use status. That's also a very important unwritten rule. Now let's see what there's next. Okay, putting out the fire. Putting out the fire. There's been some research by Joyce Fletcher, and she did a book on it. It's called Disappearing Acts. Many people, women more than men, do a lot of work to prevent fires from happening. And that means making a phone call, typing a letter, doing things so things will de-escalate. It doesn't escalate. But nobody sees what you've been doing. I have a very simple example from my husband. And you'll probably recognize that. When he empties the dishwasher, yeah, oh, okay, you know where I'm going, he will tell me. He will say, I empty the dishwasher. And I just do it. And just doing it is called a disappearing act. And that's why we all sometimes say, make sure it escalates, and then you can resolve the escalation. When at the same police force where we worked for, we did some research. And because they were curious, is our company ready to get more women on board? So we did some research, and we asked the male police officers, we asked, why would you want to have women in your company? And one of the reasons was, well, because they de-escalate. You know, when there's a fight, they de-escalate. And so we gave these answers to these female police officers who were already working there. And we said, well, they want to have you here because you de-escalate. And then they all said, well, that's great. Because we get points at the moment we put people behind bars. So it has to escalate before we can arrest people to put them behind bars. So if we de-escalate, we don't get points. And the police officers the police force didn't have a clue about that. So it's important that sometimes you have to put out the fire because that's more visible. Escalating, arresting people is much more visible than de-escalating, putting all the work in de-escalating things. So putting out the fire is a very important unwritten rule. Now, I can imagine that as a woman, when you see this and you're hearing all these masculine rules and you're thinking, do I really have to do that? Because I want to be myself, I want to be authentic. And I always say, well, you have to see it as riding a bike. When you were a young kid, you had a small bike with these side wheels, and then one day the side wheels get off. And it's kind of, you know, if you feel the tension and you're kind of scared because you're afraid that you fall off the bike. And the first time the side wheels are off, you're biking and it's like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but I'm still on my bike. And the second time it gets easier and it gets easier. And the same thing is with these unwritten rules. It's get easier the more times you do it. So adapting these unwritten rules is like riding a bike. But if you do it too much, then there is a risk that people will see you as a bitch. And this is specifically for the women, not for the men, it's specifically for the women. Maybe they will see you as a bitch. You know what it stands for, bitch? Bitch stands for being in total control of herself. So if anybody calls you bitch, just say thank you. Because that means that you are very much practicing with these unwritten rules. Now, it's a game. Play by these rules, and you can change the rules. What I said before, it will feel uncomfortable. It has to feel uncomfortable. But the moment it feels uncomfortable, you practice a lot, and I want you to challenge and to get to my next speaker, and you will introduce her, to be and dare to be the next token woman. Thank you.